Most people do boundaries the wrong way, and they don't even realize they're doing it. They think because they're setting a boundary, it's all good and it's going to work great for them. And we want to show you today how to do boundaries the right way. Now, in this context, just like, so we're on the same page and our listeners are too. Mm-hmm. There's really kind of two kinds of boundaries around there. One is like boundaries around your time and energy and involvement and stuff, right? So when we get too overextended in life, when we say yes to too many people, to too many opportunities, we need to learn to set boundaries to pull it back to where life can be manageable. Because there's lots of good stuff to do.
Yeah.
But we don't have infinite energy and time and resources. And then the second kind of boundaries is like when you're in relationship with someone and there's something about that relationship that's not working for you, might even be harmful for you, and you need to express a boundary to a person about the interaction or about the manner in which you're relating to one another. And those are the kind of boundaries that we're going to talk about in this show today. And when I say most people are setting them wrong, this is where we can really get into some good stuff.
Okay, can explore that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So our goal here is to help you set boundaries that are not manipulative, that don't feel like controlling to you or leave you feeling trapped yourself, but really just kind of set out terms that work for you. So I actually wanted to start, Verlinda, sort of on the how people mess this up side of things. Like some of the common things that we run into as therapists when we're working with folks and we see and hear them setting boundaries and what works and what doesn't work. I'm kind of lead through some points here, and if you have anything to add or especially examples or just unpack, please come in on that. So how boundary setting gets abused.
Go ahead.
Okay, so one is the ultimatum. When people set ultimatums on another person, which is like, if you do X, Y, Z, I'll never speak to you again, or something like that. The ultimatum boundary. And I understand why people do that, because they really, really don't want something to happen that is harmful for them, or
they want to be safe, like protect
they want to
themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
The problem with ultimatums is they often come back on us. So the person does that, and then I have to enforce the boundary, right? And maybe I actually want to speak to you again, but I still really don't want you to do that thing.
Right. And then it's like, do I go back on my boundary?
Yes.
My boundary. Or...
And then what does that mean?
Right.
If you never keep your boundaries, or you don't in this time with this person, right?
Yeah.
So we really want people to be very cautious around ultimatums. They often don't work well, and they're just not pro-relational. I'm going to say, like, fair enough, like, not every situation should be pro-relational. Like, not every situation do you want to develop a relationship with another person. Sometimes it's just not safe to do so.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So,
okay.
But generally speaking, like when you're around people and you want to build a relationship with them, or you want to keep the relationship, an ultimatum is not going to work too well.
Okay.
The second one is coercive control, which is I'm trying to get you to do something or to force you to do something by setting a boundary. So it's like, if you don't start doing this or that, I'm going to tell your family about that time when you were in Mexico and you know what happened there. So I'm using power and coercion to try to get you to change your behavior, but I'm calling it a boundary, so it's healthy because it's a popular psychology word.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a pretty obvious example.
Yeah.
But there are subtler examples, and we get doing this in our parenting sometimes when our kids are little. If you don't clean your room, I'm gonna whatever.
Yeah.
Now, there gets to be sort of a margin there between consequences, applying and articulating consequences for children, and trying to control our children.
Right. Yeah, the consequence has to be related somehow to the boundary. Like, otherwise it's like random objects that
they have to be tied together.
Yeah, in some way.
Yes. And I think, like, if you think in parenting terms, like, often we want to invite our children into doing things and not just always have it be a forced compliance or that kind of...
We'd like them to make good choices, not just to stop the bad.
Not just to stop the bad, yeah.
Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yeah, so we just want to watch coercive control. Manipulation is very similar to that. Again, I'm thinking maybe an older parent and a child. If you don't spend more time with me, I'm going to take away your driving privileges. Maybe it's not coercive control, but it's just like I'm trying to manipulate into
getting what I want.
Getting what I want out of this.
Yeah. Again, using a consequence that's not even related to...
Exactly. And I don't think, like, when we set those kinds of boundaries, it doesn't feel good for anybody involved.
It's not invitational. It's more like a demand or something.
Again, yeah. And then how much are you going to enjoy that time that your teen spends with you when they're doing it just so they can get the car?
That's maybe
you know what I mean?
Invitational. Yeah. Relational. Yeah.
Okay. Now, here's a big one is cutoffs. Cutoffs. When I'm setting a boundary, I'm done with this person. I'm not speaking to them anymore. I don't want to see them. I don't want to talk to them. I'm not saying we can't ever get to the stage in some contexts and relationships. Certainly we need to, where we go no contact. For sure, that needs to be an option that's available to people.
For safety.
For safety, yeah. But a lot of time people just do cutoffs. Like they had one bad conversation with a friend and they're like, I'm done with that person.
Yes. Okay. I have seen this on social media. And it's like, if someone's going to treat me that way, they're not worth having in my life. And they were insulted by one thing this person said, and then that was the end of the relationship. Mm-hmm. So is that what you're talking about here by cutoffs? Like,
yeah, it is what I'm talking about. And like, I just think like, take the Dr. Gottman research where they looked at couples and in happy marriages, there's 5 good interactions for every 1 negative interaction that happens, which I really like because it means you get 1 out of 6 times that you can screw up and still have a great marriage. You know what I mean?
That sounds terrible. That sounds like you're looking for the screw up part.
No, but I love it because it doesn't demand perfection to have a good marriage.
Yeah. Okay, like a good enough. Yes.
Now, in a friendship, it's not as like intentional or serious as a marriage often. Although I guess some friendships could be. For, when people are single and stuff, we want to make allowance for that, right?
Okay.
But the point is, like, you have to be able to screw up in a relationship without worrying about a cutoff.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Like have that safety, the benefit of the doubt, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now we'll get into abusive context towards the end of our show and when like there may need to be like a hard no contact and say a little bit about that for sure. But just generally like it's easier to drop the axe sometimes than sort out a problem in a relationship.
Yes.
Easier to drop the axe than enter into conflict. And, drop the axe is me using kind of a blunt description of this or a sharp one, but
of a cutoff,
right? But people do this and they call it a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it lowers the value of the word.
Right. Like it's such a buzzword right now.
Such a buzzword.
That,
yes.
Yeah, but we're not doing it correctly all the time. Okay.
Okay, so we are going to talk about some abuse, narcissistic abuse, and even betrayal and what boundaries look like in that context at the end of the show. Mm-hmm. And so we're saying, there are times where it's okay, there are exemptions, and maybe in those contexts we want to call it self-protection instead
of boundary.
A boundary, yeah.
Yep. Okay.
But sometimes they just get overused, and what we really need to do in our relationship when you're talking to someone or someone has offended you or they've made an offhanded comment that's hurt you a little bit is just make a complaint to that person, like get into it with them. And have that discussion, have the hard conversation, be candid with them about how their language impacted you, how you feel. Can we try to measure the words we use around one another because this relationship is important to me?
So that's a complaint? Like when I think of a complaint, I'm like, nag, 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 you do this, you do that. But that's not the complaint you're looking for.
No, and I'm using, I think this also comes from the Gottmans as well, right? I'm using a complaint instead of criticism.
Okay.
You always say nasty stuff because you're a jerk. That's criticism. Mm-hmm. When you frame things harshly, I get hurt, is a complaint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, let me give you guys, Verlinda's heard this before, let me give you guys the best definition for a boundary that I have ever heard. And it's simple, but it's harder to do than you think. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
It's harder to do than you think. Okay, here's the definition. A healthy boundary is stating the loving terms on which you're willing to engage with someone. Loving terms which you're willing to engage with something. Mm-hmm. So that's more of a paradigm shift than a person might think because we are kind of programmed to equate boundary with how you need to change so that I'm okay with you.
Yes. That's how they're used.
That's how boundaries get used.
Yeah.
And that's why like boundaries is such a great idea, but I'm just like, oh, that is not a boundary or it's a crummy boundary.
Okay.
Right? So let's unpack this statement. Stating the loving terms on which you're willing to engage with someone. So the first part of that is loving. Like there has to be something in my heart towards this person that I'm setting the boundary on if I want to have a healthy, well-articulated boundary. Like there has to be some affection, caring, loving, right? So if it's a work context, I mean, think about like the kind terms on which you're willing to engage with someone or collegial or warm or sincere, like one of those words. Friends, extended family, maybe like the affectionate terms on which I want to be in this friendship with you, and then family, loving terms on which I'm willing to engage. That takes a while because I think we get offended we get mad, and we lose track of our love and the bond that exists between us and this other person. And we don't come off as loving when we're trying to say this thing to help us get back to a safer level of interaction. Okay, and then the second part that I want to get into here related to this is we talked about it being loving, like willing to engage. I just want to unpack that a little bit because there has to be like this sort of invitational component in our hearts that's like a felt sense of like, here's how you and I can move towards each other.
Yeah. I like the towards because a boundary, how we think of boundaries, is generally a push.
It's a push.
Away.
It's a shove.
Whereas
it's a wall.
This willing to engage is like, no, I want this.
Yes. Yes.
But there's just some boundaries.
Yeah.
Some limitations into how we're willing to do this.
Yeah. Now, it can be super helpful for people. And just here's an idea as you're thinking about how to actually turn this whole thing of the loving terms in which you're willing to engage with someone into practice. Oh, you got attacked by a bug. That was fun. Is try to use I statements. I statements.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, like, a boundary's in response to, like, maybe a bit of an offense. So then I want to be like, you did this and you did that and you're like this or you're like that. But it needs to have the I component of like talking about myself. Yeah, these are the loving terms in which I'm willing to engage with you.
Okay.
So what do I need here? Okay. And that kind of segues me into a quote from Cloud and Townsend, who've written a lot about boundaries. They're like the official boundary people out there. And their books are great. We do recommend them. Yeah, in chapter 2, they talk about what does a boundary look like? And they give us this little quote here. Boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership.
That's so good. Say it again.
Boundaries often define us. They define what is me and what is not me.
Yes. Okay.
A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins.
Yes.
Leading me to a sense of ownership.
Yes. Like, think of a boundary as in like a fence in your backyard. So that shows me what's mine and what's yours.
Yeah.
And then that gives me a sense of ownership because I can do what I want in here.
Yeah. And you need to own that stuff.
And it's,
Like, that yard is your responsibility.
Yeah.
My yard is not your responsibility or within your control, really.
Yes, but it might affect me.
Yes. Like if I never spray my dandelions, they're going to blow onto your lawn.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But that same then with us as people, it's like if there's no boundary of what's mine, what's yours, I can blame it all on you. Or maybe I might blame it all on myself when actually, no, that's your junk. I end here. That's such a good definition or a good picture.
Good picture, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is kind of putting us on the spot here, but I think we need to think up some examples of like times when people enforce boundaries and like how to, maybe if we have like the not healthy example, yes or no, but certainly how you do it with this model, the loving terms in which you're willing to engage with someone.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I would love to continue this conversation when we're both calm.
Yeah. Yes.
So then I'm not just like, you're so mad and slamming the door and walking out. I'm saying, I want this.
Yeah.
So I want to engage.
Yeah.
And I need something.
Yes. In order to be able to do that well.
Calm for us to do this well.
That's a good one for sure.
What would you say?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a lot of this one kind of maybe ties to the other kind of boundary that we're not talking about today a little bit. There's a little bit of overlap here, but I noticed like some people in particular, and this comes up at church, they're like, what are you doing Friday? And then you're like, nothing. And they're like, perfect. I need help moving.
Right.
Or something like that.
Right.
And so if I had a good friendship with a person like that, like I've learned now to say, well, what do you have in mind before I tell them I'm available? Okay. But if I was in a good relationship with a person like that and we kind of help each other grow and this kind of stuff, I might think about like a boundary like this being like, you know what, I enjoy helping you. And sometimes I feel sort of, I feel baited into that a little bit because you asked me if I'm free.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for us to be really great friends, I would like you to just ask me outright what you want from me and let me have the choice as to whether I'm free or not.
Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to be on the receiving end of that. And then it's like, what do you mean the choice of whether you're free or not? It's just whether you want to help me or not. It'd be like offensive almost. And even though I agree with what you're saying.
Yes.
It seems like a much healthier way of interacting.
Yeah.
And yet on the receiving end, it's kind of like.
So, I mean, you could validate that, right? You could say, well, I can understand why it bugs you or it's uncomfortable doing it this way.
Yeah.
But I'm just like really learning to pay attention to my energy levels right now, to my own like mental health. And I'm trying to find that balance because I often say yes when I should be saying no. And so I'm just practicing good boundaries here. Yeah.
And I want to say yes as much as possible.
Yes. I want to help you when I can.
So that's the invitational part, I guess.
The invitational part. Yeah. To give you an idea.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about how people react to the boundary next.
Okay. Well, we were just talking about that.
Should we just go right there?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do they react?
So it's normal, like you kind of just saw here, to get initial negative or slightly negative or very negative response to setting a boundary, right? It's startling for anybody to have a boundary set on them because like most people aren't willingly difficult, unkind, exploitive to other people, right? But, maybe they have a little blind spot around entitlement or maybe missed out a little bit of social skill development as a child in this area or something like that. But they have a blind spot and your boundary kind of goes like this. They run into the blind spot.
Yeah, it's almost like a mirror, like it points it out to them where they haven't seen it before.
And so their reaction might be negative, but it might be more that they don't like the blind spot that they just discovered or what's in the blind spot versus not liking your boundary. But I'm just saying, like, you often get a bit of a negative response.
I can totally understand that.
Totally understand.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be prepared for that because sometimes, like, I know I sit in sessions with clients and I'm like, well, let's talk about a boundary that might work here. Like, I give them the definition, we work through it. And then sometimes thinking back, I've forgotten to say, like, how do you think that's going to go over? Because I think this is important to think about how it's going to go over and just to brace yourself for that. And even be willing to do what I did in this last example with you, which is to validate the reaction to the boundary and still hold the boundary.
Yes. Yes.
I can see why you don't like hearing this from me.
Yeah.
And restate boundary.
Yes. And I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
It was reminding me of homeostasis. Like we talk about that with couples all the time, where like if one partner changes, the other partner kind of does whatever they can to go back to the status quo. Like we like what we know, we like what's comfortable, and change is uncomfortable. Whether like you like change, I don't like change, but it's still a little bit uncomfortable.
Even if it's good change.
Because it's a new normal. It's like we have to get comfortable with it again. And so to state a boundary, I can just imagine, well, I'm imagining myself, actually. I'll just be honest.
There's something
in me that wants to go like, no. We need to go back to the old normal because I like that. It's comfortable. Even if it was dysfunctional, it's still, I knew it.
Yes, exactly. And I think where I'm going here is like, if you've done the work to create a healthy boundary.
Yeah.
And when I say done the work, like, I mean, like really kind of parse through these parts that we've outlined, but also like bounce this off a good friend, like an emotionally healthy friend.
Yeah.
Or someone with some great relationship skills. And just like see how it lands with them and what they think of it too. So you have a little bit of a feedback loop. But then when you state the boundary, like stand in the integrity of your statement, like hold the boundary.
Like it's okay that I'm making this boundary.
It's okay to have that.
It's okay to ask for it.
And it's actually okay for the other person to react against it because that just makes them a normal human being because we all have that thing baked into us where we're like, heck no, like forget it.
I don't want change.
If you're free on Fridays, I got your time. I don't want to have to leave the choice with you.
Yeah, but that just makes me want to be like, push back. Yeah.
So just stand in the integrity of the boundary. You don't need to back down just because they don't like your boundary.
Yeah.
So
we talked about how people might respond. They might not respond well.
Yes.
They probably won't respond well.
Even good friends can react a little bit or be a little bit sore.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people have had like boundaries set on them, or maybe they've had bad boundaries set on them, unhealthy boundaries, and they've felt controlled.
Yeah.
So their reaction to you might be a reaction to that as well.
Something else. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
But I do think like, especially if your boundaries around the way you're being treated, particularly mistreated, if you state the boundary and you get more mistreatment, it should actually validate the boundary.
Can I add a yes, but? Well, you can see what
You're into it now.
Yeah, I'm into it now. Like, yes, that should validate it. And maybe it's a yes and I'm responsible for how I state my boundary. If I come at you, even if the words are right, like, I'm only willing to engage if you stop yelling at me, like...
If you're yelling about not yelling.
Yeah, like
and
that's
I react
not...
to
and
that.
then you react, that's reacting to my
yeah.
yelling. That's not necessarily reacting to the boundary.
Yep.
So there's a yes and there.
Yes and. It's kind of yes and back to my point of like, just make sure it's healthy first and you set it.
Right, and the way you say it.
A way that it can be well received, right?
Yeah.
But the ideal response is for the person to adjust and meet you on those terms.
Yes.
And a lot of people do that. Like maybe after the initial, like, what the heck? Or
yes, they can get there.
they'd be like, yeah, I mean, it's ideal if they come back and they're like, you know what? I had no idea I was like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, man, I love you anyways. It was getting a little tough. I can see how it was tough.
Right.
Right. And now, like, we're both growing.
Right. And now you're like the lovingly engaged again.
Yes.
Or
I mean, that's
kindly.
it's such a great outcome. Right. And that's what we hope for.
Mm-hmm.
The loving terms on which you're willing to engage with someone. So we're hoping for people to move together.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Let's talk about abuse for a moment here. This is a pivot.
Pivot. Yes.
Yeah. So there's some special circumstances. There's some things in life where like the normal rules change.
Yes.
This is one of those things. Okay.
Okay.
Now, quite often when you set a boundary against an abusive person, you're going to get DARVO'd. DARVO is an acronym that stands for deny. So I deny whatever you're accusing me of. I attack. That's the A. Attack you back. And then reverse victim and offender.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of you being offended by my misbehavior, I'm offended by the fact that you're trying to manipulate me with a boundary, even though your boundary was a healthy, well-phrased boundary, right?
Yeah.
So DARVO happens. So there's kind of these, DARVO is one of the tactics that's used. And this is one of the clues that you might be dealing with an abusive person or a person who resorts to abusive tactics in conflict.
Okay.
And it's important to note, like, two things happen in abuse situations around boundaries in particular. I think one to pay attention to is that you're villainized for having a healthy boundary.
Mm-hmm. You're villainized.
You're villainized. You're made to be the bad person for having a boundary.
Okay. Okay.
And that's because boundaries reduce control, and control is the essence of what abuse is driving at.
Okay. So in abuse, like, abuser has control over the situation. So a boundary is kind of bringing yourself up, and they're like, no, I've lost that chunk. So they're going to kind of hammer down to try and eradicate this boundary.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And then the second thing is, and this is particularly devious, is that the boundary technique is sometimes adopted by the abuser and then weaponized against you in an effort to force you to remove your boundaries.
So are they weaponizing my boundary?
They might
the
weaponize
term
your boundary, or they might just be like, oh, we're using boundaries? Well, I have a boundary for you. I'm selling your car. In abusive marriages, this is stuff that happens.
Okay.
I'm selling your car, so you can't go anywhere. And then all of a sudden, like the small boundary you set on me, I've just gone up to this ridiculous level, and you're like, oh, I got to back this down because my car was like my lifeline to the outside world.
Right.
And
so I'm not going to set another boundary because
exactly.
What's
or you might
next?
say, like, Caleb, like, you can't set that as a boundary. And I'm like, well, you're setting boundaries, so I'm setting boundaries too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, these are signals about what's happening in the abusive mindset and in the power and control dynamic that exists in that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Can I say something about that for a second? My trauma prof talked about this because often when you try and like gain a little bit of power, the abuser's like, well, now you're controlling me and you're trying to manipulate. Yes. And he made the statement, are you exerting control for your safety, or are you exerting control to exploit? And I thought that was pretty powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, and the same could go to boundaries then. Am I using a boundary to establish safety for myself or using a boundary to exploit you?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. The reason why I'm coming to this is because in relationships where there's conflict, boundaries can help work through conflict.
Yes.
In relationships where there's conflict and abuse, the boundaries just fail and you have no idea why. And it's like, well, I just listened to this thing from Caleb and Verlinda on normalized therapy for 20 minutes and it sounded great. It sounded like it was work. And I made it like on the loving terms on which I'm willing to engage. I was feeling invitational and the whole thing like completely blew up on me. And it could just be because you're in this abusive situation and they want to take that tool away from you because of this thing that you illustrated for us earlier, where one person's getting stronger and the strongest, air quotes, doesn't want that.
Right. Okay. So how do you know then the difference between like homeostasis and someone reacting to a boundary versus like an abusive reaction?
Well, there's a couple things. One is like, is this bad behavior in this moment, or is this part of a pattern, an ongoing pattern?
Right. Okay.
Two is like, if I give them a day and they come back to me, are they backing up and coming in with some humility and saying, you know what, I overreacted yesterday. I can see how what I've been doing has been hard on you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to adjust, which is what a loving partner would do for another loving partner.
Yeah. And then I guess you just went over those 2 points about like villainizing it.
Yes. And weaponizing it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So it may actually be in these kinds of cases where the abuse is strong or severe to this level that you're not able to set boundaries and to find loving terms in which you can engage with this person without being harmed.
Right. It's too dangerous.
It's too dangerous to do so. And that's because of features that exist in the psyche of the other person that are outside of your control, that are not yours to solve, that you're actually not capable of solving or fixing or changing. And so your choice in that situation could include a number of things, but it may be also to go low contact or no contact, depending on the level of engagement you need to have with this person, or to work towards that. An escape plan, for example, in a very abusive marriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing that I want to say about this too, like, is we often see like an extended family, like from like adult children to parents or adult siblings kind of situations where there's not like an obligation necessarily to live together, but you're family. So you kind of have to, have contact. That articulating a boundary with an abusive relative could get all these reactions, could make life very difficult for you. They could sort of assemble the family against you to try to coerce you out of the boundary and all this kind of stuff. Like it just gets super messy from setting a boundary, which is why we ask people to think about the consequences. But I want to say here that it's okay, and I just discovered this actually in my own therapy a couple of years ago, or last year maybe it was, that it's okay to actually set a boundary in these kinds of situations with an abusive person and not articulate it to them. Like to just have that boundary for yourself. Because I really struggled with, like, if I haven't actually told them why I'm going low contact.
Is it a boundary?
Is it a boundary, or am I being weak? And then I think about telling them and what a nightmare that would turn out to be.
Yeah.
And my therapist is like, you can have your boundary. You don't have to articulate it. And I just feel like so much permission from that and calmness and safer in that situation.
Yeah.
Again, that's for the context of abuse. Like in real life with normal people, it's good to articulate these boundaries, to enter into a little bit of conflict so you can invite, you can engage, you can have that relationship.
Can I push back on one thing you just said there? You talked about like this is for abuse, and in real life.
Oh, sorry.
And for some people, normal that life, is real life.
In normal, healthy interactions.
Okay.
I'll say, Okay, and then betrayal. And we'll just wrap up after the betrayal piece here. There's lots to say about betrayal and boundaries, but just kind of some basics, because a lot of people experience this, and I'm thinking mainly of infidelity here. It could work for financial betrayal or other kinds of betrayal as well. But often, like when situations like infidelity, what you need in the early stages is like a safe space that you can retreat to as the betrayed partner. It could be just your bedroom, something like that, or it could be like the entire floor of your house, one floor, like an in-house separation. It could be like not being physically intimate with the partner who's betrayed you because you don't know if you're going to get STDs from them or if you've already contracted STDs from them. And there could be also issues around violence, sometimes in a reverse role on the betrayed partner's part. But it can be necessary to set these kind of boundaries. So especially if you think about like a couple with kids in the home and one person has been unfaithful in that marriage or in that relationship. And it's like, well, how do we keep raising these kids, doing day life, not having a ton of stuff land on our kids, like because we're blowing up the family unit? And that's where boundaries can be really effective, just to say, okay, like let's do the kid thing until they're put to bed, and then you're in the basement. because I need a safe space where I can process this trauma. I need an hour with my therapist, or I need to be able to talk to my sister or my brother and just kind of figure all this junk out.
Yeah. Or even like timing.
Yes.
We talk about timing a lot with boundaries.
Timing, do you want to unpack on or expand on that?
Yeah, like it's really easy when something's so big in our lives to like hash it out till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and not much productive conversation happens, at least in our life.
You don't feel like you're moving forward. It's often like you're just going over the same stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And so sometimes we have to set boundaries of like, okay, we're not going to discuss this after whatever PM, or this room, we've also seen this, is like this room is a safe place. So in this room, we will not discuss, or in this park, or in this whatever you do together, we won't discuss this situation, this betrayal. And it just kind of, it gives it a boundary. Like it's still there.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's not overarching, completely
it's
enveloping
contained.
us. Contained. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. And people can regulate and calm and rest and do self-care and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And then the last thing I just wanted to point out on this particular topic too, Rolinda, is that the boundaries need to evolve rapidly over time. Not rapidly. Like they need to be set, but they have to be able to be changed. So the boundaries that make sense immediately post-discovery or post-disclosure may not make sense 6 months later. Or if your partner is doing their work to discover like why they committed the infidelity, what was going on for them, maybe that involves childhood wounds and all this other stuff, and they're becoming a very safe person, the boundary you set on them at the start to feel safe, like they're now starting to own the safety to bring themselves into the marriage as a safe person. And if you can see that and you can evaluate that, and over time your trust can build in that, then you want to bring this boundary that you've held back. Because at the end of the day, for that marriage to continue, that person has to hold the boundary on your behalf.
Right. The boundary of their
of the
fidelity.
Sacredness, their fidelity to the marriage to keep you safe. So initially betrayal, like you set the safety you need, but then you kind of moving back to normal marriage, if you will, or healthy marriage, let me say that, where each partner is holding the boundaries of safety together around the union that exists between you.
That's good. Yeah. Like in the moment, I'm just trying to think of an example as you were talking, and it's like, this is what I came up with. You can tell me if this is an example or not. But right after betrayal is discovered, it could be like, I need to know every place that you're going.
Yeah.
And if you're driving home from work and you stop at the grocery store to buy me flowers, which is lovely, I need to know that you stopped at the grocery store ahead of like when you stop.
Yes.
Right. And it just seems like, okay, this is like detail.
It's such a high level of scrutiny.
Yeah. But 6 months later.
Let's go with a year.
Let's go. Yeah, 6 months. But okay, like for us, if you're going somewhere, you let me know you're going somewhere.
Right.
But if you stop and get the mail, you don't need to text me and tell me you stopped to get the mail.
No.
So is that what you mean by the boundaries changing?
Yes. So if I betrayed you, I would stop and let you know I was getting the mail.
Yeah.
And I might even text you when I got back in the car.
Right. For my safety.
I'm on the way so that you could feel safe, right? But again, if I, as the betrayer, was doing my personal work, right, and you were seeing that, and I was committed to therapy, and it wouldn't make sense for me to keep doing that. So that burden of boundaries needs to be reduced as the betraying partner does their recovery work. And as your trauma symptoms come down as a betrayed partner too.
So as the betrayed partner's doing their work too.
Yeah. Because what happens is we see folks sometimes and they're kind of far down the road and there's still all these boundaries and monitoring and stuff like this. And I just want to be super careful about victim blaming here and not go there. Because
it makes sense why they do it.
It makes sense why they do it. But there's a point at which the betrayer could have done the personal work they need to be a safe partner.
Yes.
And if the betrayed partner hasn't dealt with the trauma that was dumped on them by the betrayal, they may not be able to see that.
Yeah.
And that puts a lot of strain on a marriage. So a marriage that could make it sometimes fails 1 or 2 or 3 or more years after infidelity because the betrayal trauma has not been healed. not really because the betraying partner is still unfaithful.
Safe. Yeah. So it's because of the betrayal, but not because the betrayer is still
Yeah,
unfaithful.
and that's a super delicate
That's tough. Yeah.
thing. So we just want to have a lot of compassion around that, but let folks know, like, that's something to watch out for. Think about whether, hey, maybe is this what's happening here?
Right. Or do I need to adjust my boundaries?
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, that's all we have on boundaries for this particular show. Thanks for sticking with us. If you want, you can get the full show notes on our website at therapivo.com/283.
See you next time.